The silence was the first thing that got to me. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of nothing. The kind of silence that presses in on your eardrums until you can hear the blood pulsing in your temples. We were 200 miles north of Fairbanks, a speck of humanity on a frozen sea of white. Our research station, a collection of prefabricated domes and communication antennae, was buried under snow that had been accumulating for centuries. I was a glaciologist, part of a 3-person team tasked with drilling the deepest ice core in human history. Our names were Jack, Maria, and myself. Elias. Jack was a burly, bearded veteran of polar expeditions, a man who seemed more home on a glacier than in a heated room. Maria was a lead researcher, a brilliant but tightly wound woman who lived and breathed data. And I was the youngest, the rookie, the one who was still slightly awestruck by the sheer, terrifying beauty of this place. We had been here for 8 weeks. 8 weeks of constant cold, endless white, and the low, guttural hum of our machinery. Our target depth was 10,000 feet. We were at 8,700, making slow, agonizing progress. The air was a constant minus 50 degrees, and the wind, when it came, felt like a physical blow. Our world was a circle of light carved out of a black and white canvas, framed by the northern lights dancing like ghosts in the sky. The day began, it was a sound, a single, deep thrum that reverberated through the very bedrock. We were in the main dome, looking at the latest core sample, a perfect cylinder of ice dating back 1,000,000 years. It was Maria who heard it first. She froze, her hand hovering over a piece of equipment, her head cocked to one side. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Jack and I had both heard it. It was too low to be a plane, too consistent to be an earthquake. It was a frequency that you felt in your chest more than you heard with your ears. Jack dismissed it as a geological event, a minor tremor deep in the Earth's crust. Maria, ever the scientist, went to our seismograph. There was nothing, no spike, no line, just a flat, empty trace. The thrum came again an hour later, this time a series of rapid pulses. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It was the same feeling, the same deep resonance. Maria ran a diagnostics check on our borehead, thinking the sound was coming from our drilling. Everything was normal. "It's coming from below us," she said, her voice barely audible. "The sensors, they're picking up something." Jack scoffed. "A pocket of gas. A fault line settling. Don't go looking for ghosts, Maria." But she was already looking. For the next 3 days, the thrumming became a constant, low beat that seeped into the walls of our domes, into our bones. We started to sleep with our helmets on, just to dampen the sound. It was relentless, hypnotic, and then the nightmare started. I dreamed of falling, not a normal fall, but a slow, endless plunge through black water. And at the very bottom, there was a light, a single point of light that wasn't a star or a sun, but something hungry. Jack's dreams were being buried alive, of the ice and the snow collapsing around him. Maria, who refused to discuss her dreams, began to get jumpy, snapping at us over small things, her eyes wide with fear that wasn't just about the cold or the isolation. Maria's obsession with the thrumming grew. She was convinced it was some form of intelligent communication. She spent hours in the communications room, her headset on, trying to make sense of the strange, repetitive pattern. Jack and I would watch her, a silent dread growing between us. Then she had a breakthrough. "It's a code," she said one morning, her face pale. "A repeating sequence. I've decoded part of it." She held up a notepad with a string of numbers and symbols. It's a message from something old." Jack, ever the pragmatist, was furious. "You're losing it, Maria. It's a geological anomaly, not a fucking alien broadcast." "It's in the ice, Jack," she screamed, her voice cracking. "It's living in the ice. Listen to it. You can feel it." The argument ended with Jack storming out to check the generator, and Maria retreating to her lab. The silence that followed was worse than the thrumming. That night, Maria disappeared. We searched for her for 18 hours. The storm had come in hard and fast, a blinding wall of snow. Visibility was zero. Jack said she must have gotten disoriented, but I knew that wasn't it. Maria knew the layout of the camp like the back of her hand. We found her jacket near the borehole, and the last of her gear inside the equipment dome. Nothing else. Jack's sanity seemed to fray after that. He became obsessed with the borehole, muttering to himself, staring down into the dark abyss we had drilled. I kept my distance, the fear of the unknown now replaced by the terror of being alone with a man who was clearly coming unhinged. The thrumming was louder now, a constant low-frequency hum that vibrated through the floor plates. It was so loud it made it difficult to think. I started hearing other things too. Whispers in the wind, a child's laugh carried on the frigid air. The station's lights would flicker and dim in time with the thrum. One afternoon, I found Jack staring at the borehole, his face bathed in the eerie red glow of the work lights. He didn't turn when I approached. "It's alive, Elias," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. Maria was right. "What's alive, Jack?" I asked, my voice trembling. He pointed a shaky finger at the borehole. "The cold, the darkness. It's been down there all this time, waiting. It's lonely." He looked at me, his eyes wide and vacant. "It wants us to join it." I took a step back, my heart pounding against my ribs. He turned, and I saw a thin, jagged line of red on his forehead. "Jack, what's wrong?" It showed me what it's like. A vast black emptiness. And something, a mind, so old it could make stars into dust. He smiled a chilling, childlike grin, and it's not buried below us. It's buried in us. He lunged for me, a wild, animalistic look in his eyes. I stumbled back, grabbing a fire extinguisher and swinging it wildly. The metallic hiss of the spray filled the air as he fell to the floor, gasping. I didn't wait to see if he was breathing. I ran out into blinding white, the cold sear in my lungs, the wind biting at my exposed skin. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to get away from the borehole, from the thrumming, from the thing that had driven Jack and Maria mad. The thrumming followed me, a low, persistent beat in my head, now joined by the whispering voices I had heard before. They weren't in the wind anymore. They were in my mind. "Come home," a voice said, a cold, soft whisper that seemed to emanate from the very ice beneath my feet. "We've been waiting." I tripped, falling into a drift, the fine, crystalline snow filling my mouth and nose. I choked, fighting the panic. I looked up and saw it, the borehole. But it wasn't just a hole in the ground anymore. It was a shimmering portal, a deep, pulsating blackness that seemed to ripple like oil. And within it, I saw shapes moving, not living things. Shapes that defied geometry, that twisted and writhed in the darkness. And the light, the same light from my dreams, the hungry light. I scrambled to my feet, my legs burning with effort. I had to get back to the main dome, get to the radio, call for help. The voices in my head screamed at me, a cacophony of 1,000 whispering minds. "You can't leave us. You know you want to stay. The silence is better. The cold is comfort." I forced myself onward, my frozen fingers fumbling with the latch on the dome's door. The thrumming was a hammer now, a physical force that drove a spike of ice into my skull with every beat. I stumbled inside and collapsed against the door, gasping for air, shaking uncontrollably. I crawled to the radio, my hands numb, my mind a blizzard of noise. I flicked the switch, the familiar crackle of static a momentary comfort. "This is Station 7. I choked out, my voice raw. Mayday! Mayday! We have a catastrophic event. Station 1, come in. Station 1, do you copy? Only static replied. I tried again, my voice growing hoarse. A thin, high-pitched whine began to emerge in the static, a sound that made my teeth ache. It was a thrumming, now coming to the radio itself, but faster, higher. And then I heard it. A voice. It wasn't a human voice, but a collection of them. Maria's voice, Jack's voice, and 1,000 others, all whispering in unison. Heard and received, and you are home now. The last word was a cacophonous crescendo of voices, 1,000 whispers becoming one. A piercing shriek of sound that shattered the radio's components and blew out the lights in the dome. I fell back, my hands clamped over my ears, the sound still echoing in my mind. The dome went dark, save for the single red emergency light that pulsed in time with the thrumming, which was now a part of me, a second heartbeat. I could feel it in my skull and my bones. I was no longer alone in this frozen wasteland. I was a part of something larger, a symphony of whispers. I knew with a cold, terrifying certainty that Maria and Jack were not dead. They were just changed. They had gone home. And the borehole, the deep, dark hole we had drilled, was not a hole at all. It was an ear, a mouth, and it had finally heard us. I looked down at my hands and saw the ice forming on my fingertips, a thin, crystalline layer that was not a product of the cold. It was a mark of the thing below, slowly but surely taking hold. My own mind was a battleground, a chorus of voices, and a solitary, terrified scream that was still mine. For now, I stood and walked toward the dome door, my movements no longer my own. The whispers in my head were a chorus of encouragement. The silence of Alaska was a lie. The whole world was a symphony of dread, and I was just a new instrument. I pushed open the door and stepped out into the biting cold, my final scream lost in the endless white. I could feel it, the ancient, silent thing below, reaching out not to touch, but to envelop. It was an embrace of perfect, cold silence, and I was going home. The Alaskan sun in late September is a tired, golden thing. It hangs low in the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows that stretch across the mountain for hours before finally sinking into a brief, bruised twilight. I'm a park ranger, a solitary watcher over a swath of territory the size of a small country, most of it untamed wilderness. My patrol route was a 10-mile loop through the Chugach National Forest, a place where the trees grow so thick and the silence is so profound it feels like a physical weight. My name is Mark. For a week, I had been alone. My partner, Ben, was covering a different sector, and our only communication was a sporadic crackle on the two-way radio. The isolation was part of the job, the part one both loved and feared. It was a place where you could believe you were the last man on earth. My first sign that something was wrong wasn't a growl or footstep. It was a sound that was too perfect. I was sitting on a fallen log, eating a can of beans, when I heard the call of a great horned owl. It was a rich, beautiful hoot, a sound I knew by heart. Hoo, 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 hoo. But something about it was off. The resonance was too clean, too pure, like a recording. The owls out here always had a slight raggedness to their call, a natural imperfection. This one was flawless. I chalked it up to nerves and the solitude. The mind plays tricks. I finished my meal, packed my gear, and continued on the trail. The sun was beginning its slow descent, and the chill was already creeping into the air. An hour later, I was traversing a dense thicket when I heard it again. A different sound this time. A wolf's howl. It was a mournful, drawn-out cry that echoed off the granite cliffs. But it was not a lone howl. It was a chorus of them, a perfect, staggered symphony of howls, all from different directions, all from what seemed like the same wolf. They were too close to one another, too impossibly in sync. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew the wolf packs in this area. They were elusive, their calls rare and cautious. This was a grand theatrical performance, a sound designed to terrify. I felt a primal fear rising in my throat. I grabbed my rifle, the cold steel a small comfort in the growing twilight. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my small tent, the flimsy nylon, a poor barrier against the night. The sounds came and went, a maddening random orchestra of the wilderness. The cry of a lone moose, the chittering of a squirrel, the distant call of a raven. Each sound was precise, yet fundamentally wrong, as if an expert musician were playing a familiar song on an instrument made of bone. I tried to radio bend, but all I got was static. The signals were always weak out here, but this was a complete blackout. A cold dread settled in my stomach. The thing out there, whatever it was, knew I was alone. The next morning, I moved with a new sense of purpose. I had to get back to my cabin, to the warmth and safety of the radio, and a real roof over my head. The fear from the night had been replaced with a focused, animalistic vigilance. I walked with my rifle in my hands, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line, my ears straining to decipher every rustle and snap of a twig. The sounds followed me, not the perfect imitations from the night before, but new ones, more subtle, more personal. I heard my name whispered on the wind. Mark. It was my mother's voice, soft and worried, the way she used to say it when I was a boy and she saw a scrape on my knee. I froze, the hairs on my arms standing on end. I knew it wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mother was 1,000 miles away. But the sound was so vivid, so real, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. I heard my partner's voice next. Mark, you need to turn back. It's not safe. It was Ben, his voice a low, urgent warning. I shook my head, my jaw clenched. This thing was trying to get inside my head, to make me doubt my own sanity. I kept moving. As I neared a small clearing, I heard a new sound. It was the sound of a child crying. A soft, heart-wrenching sob. It was a sound that a human could not ignore. My training, my instincts, all told me to ignore it, to keep moving. But my humanity, it was too strong. I changed course, moving toward the sound, my rifle still held high. I found nothing. No child, no footprints, nothing. I knew I had been a fool. The tears stung my eyes, a mixture of rage and terror. The thing was playing with me. It was toying with me, learning my weaknesses. And now it knew what I cared about. I turned and ran back toward the trail, pushing through a stand of spruce trees. My breath came in ragged gasps, and the fear was a raw, burning acid in my lungs. I heard the sounds again, but this time they were different. They were twisted, malevolent caricatures of the voices I knew. My mother's worried voice became a high-pitched, maniacal cackle. Ben's urgent warning became a raspy, mocking whisper. Turn back, Mark. You're lost. I heard the child's cry again, but this time it was a guttural, inhuman shriek of laughter. The sounds were no longer just a lure. They were a threat. They were laughing at me. And then I heard something I couldn't explain. I heard my own voice, but not a recording of it. I heard a voice I knew to be mine say with perfect clarity, "You can't hide forever, Mark." I stumbled to a stop, my mind reeling. How could it do that? How could it know what I was thinking? It wasn't just imitating. It was learning. It was inside my head. I broke into a full sprint, the trees a blur of green and black as I pushed my way through. I had to get to the cabin. The whispers in my head turned to a chorus of taunts, a symphony of twisted, familiar voices telling me I was to die out here, alone. I finally reached the last mile of the trail, the one that led directly to my cabin. The forest fell silent. The air was still and cold. The stillness was worse than the cacophony of sound. I moved cautiously, my heart pounding in my ears. I was being watched. I could feel it. The thing was close. I came to a small clearing and saw it. A deer, a majestic buck, standing perfectly still in the middle of the clearing. It stared at me, its head cocked to one side. The look in its eyes was not that of an animal. It was a cold, intelligent gaze. And from its mouth, a perfect human voice spoke, a low, smooth sound that made my skin crawl. "You're not welcome here, Mark." The deer took a step toward me, not with the natural gait of a deer, but with a stiff, jointed motion, like a marionette being pulled by unseen strings. Its head twisted at an unnatural angle, and its mouth stretched into a grotesque, smiling grimace. I raised my rifle, my hand shaking so violently I could barely hold it steady. The thing wasn't the deer. The deer was just a puppet. The sound was coming from the woods all around me, a low, constant, guttural rumble that vibrated through the air, the true voice of the thing that was out there. I fired, the shot echoing through clearing. The deer dropped, and for a split second I saw it, just a glimpse, a flicker of movement in the trees behind the deer. It was not an animal, not a man. It was tall and thin, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to bend at odd angles. Its body was a jumble of twisted branches and mud, and from its form, a dozen small, white mouths open and closed in silent, mocking laughter. I turned and ran, the image seared into my brain. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the porch of my cabin, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I fumbled with the lock, my frozen fingers refusing to cooperate. I finally burst through the door and slammed it shut, collapsing on the floor, gasping for air. I stayed that night in my sleeping bag, my rifle on my chest, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The silence was once again the first thing that got to me. But this time, it was a different kind of silence. It was a silence that was listening, a silence that held 1,000 voices, waiting. I made it out of the woods the next day. I never went back. I never told anyone what I saw, because I know now that some places are not meant to be explored. Some things are not meant to be found. And in the long, dark places of the world, there are things that can learn your voice and use it to call you home. My name is Ethan, and I was a fool. A proud, ambitious fool who believed that the natural world, no matter how remote or unforgiving, held no secrets I couldn't solve with enough data and a calibrated sensor. I was an environmental biologist, and my mission was simple. Monitor the permafrost thaw in one of the most remote regions of the Brooks Range, a jagged spine of mountains separating the frigid north from the rest of Alaska. The thaw was a known phenomenon, but my research site was showing a rate of decay that defied all current models. My camp was a solitary tent and a small equipment dome, nestled in a valley that had never seen human habitation before. I had flown in with a bush pilot 3 weeks ago, and he wasn't due back for another 2. The long days of summer were fading, replaced by the crisp, endless twilight of approaching autumn. The sun hung low on the horizon, a distant, indifferent orb. The first strange thing I noticed was the shadows. Not the long, dramatic shadows that the low sun cast across the tundra, but something else entirely. They seemed to move. I would be taking a soil sample, and out of the corner of my eye, a shadow from a distant rock would seem to stretch, a tendril of inky blackness reaching towards the ground. When I looked directly, it was just a shadow. My rational mind dismissed it as visual fatigue from staring at a landscape of endless pale tones. I wrote it off as a symptom of my profound isolation. Then came the cold. The instruments told me the temperature was a consistent 2 degrees Celsius, well within the normal range for this time of year. But I would stand in a pocket of air that felt like absolute zero, A cold that didn't just chill my skin but seemed to sap the very warmth from my bones. It was a cold that felt hungry, a cold that wasn't a lack of heat, but a consuming presence. I could see the heat from my own body visibly ripple away from me in the still air, a distorted wave of heat that seemed to evaporate into nothingness. I began to feel a constant, low-grade anxiety. Every creak of the tent, every gust of wind, every snap of a distant twig sent a jolt of fear through me. The silence was overwhelming, a vast, oppressive blanket. I started talking to myself, to my equipment, to the wind itself, just to hear a human voice. My data logs from that week are filled with rambling, nonsensical entries. I was losing my grip, and I knew it. The second week, a new variable entered the equation. My instruments began to fail. First, the thermometer in the equipment dome went haywire, showing temperatures of minus 200 degrees Celsius for hours at a time before settling back to normal. Then, the battery on my remote permafrost sensor died. It was a solar-powered unit, and the day had been perfectly clear. It was fully charged in the morning, but when I went to check in the afternoon, it was completely dead. I thought it was a malfunction and replaced it. The next day, the same thing happened. I watched the second unit, and in the space of an hour, the battery indicator went from 100% to 0. It wasn't a sudden drop, but a gradual, unnatural fade. The numbers ticked down one by one, a steady decline that felt deeply wrong. I started to get scared. My fear of isolation was now replaced with more acute, visceral terror of the unknown. I spent the next night hunched in my tent, a propane lantern hissing softly in the center, its meager warmth a tiny fortress against the encroaching cold. I couldn't sleep. I just listened to the silence, waiting, and then I saw it. I was peering out of the tent flap, looking at the distant mountains in the twilight. A small dark speck detached itself from the rocky outcrop and began to move, not walking or flying, but gliding, a silent, weightless movement. It was a shape that was a pure, unblemished black. It absorbed the light of the twilight, leaving a distorted, warped space around it. The air shimmered with an unnatural stillness. It glided closer, and I could feel the temperature in the tent drop. I could feel the warmth of the lantern being sucked away, the light itself dimming, the flame shrinking into a tiny, blue-tinged flicker. I scrambled back from the tent flap, fumbling for my satellite phone, my hand shaking so violently I could barely press the buttons. I was in a blind panic. I tried to call for help, but the phone was dead. Its battery, which had been fully charged just hours before, was gone. The screen was a black, empty square. I grabbed a lantern, its light now a barely there whisper, and stumbled out of the tent, my breath a thick cloud of fog that froze instantly on my eyelashes. I had to get to my snowmobile. It was my only hope. It sat 50 feet away, a lump of metal and frozen rubber. I prayed its battery was still alive. I ran, my boots crunching on the permafrost. The shadows writhed around me, stretching, shrinking, moving with a silent intelligence. I felt the consuming cold at my back, a physical pressure on my spine. I could hear a sound now, a low, sibilant whisper. It was a sound of air being drawn in, a soft, hungry hiss. I reached the snowmobile and fumbled with the key. My fingers were stiff with cold, and a primal terror was screaming in my head. I jammed the key in and turned it. The engine sputtered, a weak, desperate choke. The headlights flickered, their light dim and sickly. They seemed to fade before my very eyes. I heard the sound again, closer this time. The sibilant hiss was right behind me, a sound of hunger. I dared to look back. The dark shape was there, no more than 20 feet away. It was taller now, its pure blackness seeming to swell and grow. It was an absence of light, a hole in the fabric of the world. And from its core, I could see 1,000 tiny pinpricks of light, not glowing, but being consumed, a maelstrom of disappearing stars. I tried the key again, my hands a trembling mess. The engine sputtered once more and then roared to life, a glorious, thunderous sound that seemed to momentarily hold the darkness at bay. The headlights flickered, but held. I slammed the throttle down, the snowmobile lurching forward, a metal beast fighting for its life against an invisible predator. I raced across the tundra, the cold wind whipping at my face, but I knew the true cold was behind me, following. I looked back, and in the faint, receding light, I saw the black shape gliding silently over the ground, a hole in the landscape that seemed to be growing. It wasn't fast, but it was relentless. I didn't stop. I rode to the night, the engine screaming, the snowmobile a frantic speck of light in a sea of encroaching darkness. As the dawn approached, a new, more horrifying truth dawned on me. The sun was rising, a weak, pale disk on the horizon, but its light was not reaching me. The valley I had left behind was still cloaked in an unnatural, impenetrable twilight. The shadows were not receding. The light was being eaten. The thing wasn't chasing me. It was following the sun, feasting on its light, and I was just an appetizer. It had used the night to get to me, to learn my weaknesses, to sap my power. Now it was going for a bigger meal. I made it to the river, a raging torrent of glacial melt. I looked back one last time. The blackness was a vast, sprawling blot on the horizon, consuming the dawn. I abandoned the snowmobile and scrambled into a small, dilapidated cabin, slamming the door shut. I sat there for hours, listening. The sounds of the wilderness were gone. There was a low, constant whisper, a sound of vast, insatiable hunger that seemed to permeate the wood of the cabin, the very ground below. The cabin was a small, fragile bubble of warmth, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the darkness found a way in. I could feel the cold seeping to the walls, a silent, encroaching dread. The final act of terror came not from the outside, but from the inside. As the last bit of warmth was siphoned from the air, I looked at my own hands. The vibrant color of my skin was fading, becoming a pale, anemic white. My body heat was being consumed from within. The cold wasn't just outside. It was inside me, an empty, silent thing. I felt my heart slow, my mind grow quiet. The warmth, the vibrant light of my own life, was being eaten. I finally understood what the thing was. It was a predator that didn't consume flesh, but energy. It fed on light and warmth, on sound and life. And in the silence of the Alaskan wilderness, it was starving. I closed my eyes and waited. The cold was an embrace. The darkness was a blanket. And the last thing I heard was my own scream, a silent, terrified cry that was absorbed into the void. Then there was nothing, only the perfect, consuming silence of the Sun Eater. Thank you for watching, but remember, the darkness doesn't end when the story does. If you're brave enough, subscribe for more tales from another world where nightmares never sleep.